June the 5th has been chosen as a day for this presentation, which I think will inspire and you'll remember for a long time afterwards. I have a great honor to introduce you to Jade Cookson. Jade has been a master's student, and basically your profession is a teacher, as a swimming teacher.
Swimming teacher, yeah.
But your special interest, which emerged during the course of life, has been to really focus on poetry and romanticism, and she's done a master's at the University of Cumbria as a sort of add-on to her working life. We came across her when an idea emerged about a year ago, and Gordon, our chair here, is the person who is the inspiration behind it. But it'd be very good to try to develop a walking route from here or from Ambleside that would be in honour, branded, if you like, as a special way to mark the role of the Wordsworths in our lives here. And she gained her postgraduate qualification in literature, romanticism in the English Lake District. And her first research project focused on Ullswater, which led her to think of ways in which she could celebrate the life of Wordsworth. I myself was involved with the University of Cumbria. We made contacts with them, and they showed a great interest also in developing, in association with the Wordsworth Trust in Grasmere, a special route to celebrate William Wordsworth and Dorothy Wordsworth. She's a teacher of swimming, of children with special educational needs and disabilities, but her first love is walking the fells with a dog and running the fells.
Sometimes, yeah.
And tracing the ancestry of various people in this area. It's very much an honor for her because the whole process of bringing this notion of a concept of the Wordsworth Way from an idea to actually happening only happened in a matter of 15 months or so, when the idea was put in a paper in February 2024, and the launch of the Wordsworth Way took place in April the 7th this year. So it's been quite a concerted effort. And I'm very pleased to say that the latest edition of Cumbria Life is devoted 3 pages. There's a very nice mugshot of our chair, Gordon Light, on the page. An excellent piece also by Jade, with a page also on the fate of Rydal Manor, which is something which I think will be touched on also in her talk. So without more ado, I would like to welcome Jade to take the floor. Enjoy.
Thank you. Hello everyone, and welcome to my talk on creating the Wordsworth Way. Today I'll begin by briefly exploring the traditions of literary tourism before Wordsworth's moved to Dove Cottage in 1799. I'll then give an overview of his guide to the lake's impact on how we view the region today. I'll also consider why Wordsworth is best understood as a poet of place, and why that idea is central to our walking experience. Finally, I'll walk you through the creative process behind the Wordsworth Way itself. In designing the Wordsworth Way, our aim wasn't simply to retrace the poet's steps, but to encourage walkers to engage with the landscape as Wordsworth once did, emotionally, spiritually, and imaginatively. Wordsworth's writing played a defining role in shaping the cultural and emotional landscape of the lakes, and today I'll reflect on how that legacy lives on through the Wordsworth Way. Thank you all for being here, and to those watching online, I hope you enjoy the talk. Oh, there we go. So why Wordsworth? A tribute to the place poet. In a guide dedicated to Wordsworth's poems and their places, David McCracken describes Wordsworth as the English poet of place, highlighting how important the Lake District was in shaping his poetic identity. So what is place poetry? Place poetry focuses on the relationship between human experience and specific geographical locations. In linking geographical terrain with memory and emotion, place poetry centralises the physical environment to poetic expression. For the lake poets, Wordsworth, Coleridge and Southey, Cumbria and the Lake District became a backdrop for philosophical, emotional and political reflection. Indeed, McCracken writes that no other great poet has influenced our consciousness of an English place as much as Wordsworth has done of the Lake District. No other has written so extensively, perceptively, and fruitfully about a particular landscape, and no other has devoted so much attention to travellers. Do I need to point it at that to make it work? There we go. This approach to place poetry lives on today, from Seamus Heaney's rootedness in Northern Ireland and W.H. Auden's love for the Northern Pennines, the laser on it, to Nan Shepherd's ecological mapping of the Scottish cairngorms. That way. So the years before Wordsworth moved to Grasmere were marked by frequent displacements and periods of uncertainty. Although William and Dorothy were natives of Cumbria, born in Cockermouth, they spent much of their youth separated and moved between various relatives and lodgings following the early death of their parents. Their arrival at Grasmere in 1799 marked not only a physical return to the lakes, but also an emotional homecoming, a moment of reunion and stability after years of upheaval. In the autumn of 1799, Wordsworth and Coleridge toured the Lake District, visiting Grasmere. William writes to Dorothy, "There's a small house empty at Grasmere which we might take, but of this we will speak, ... By Christmas, shortly after Dorothy's 29th birthday, the siblings had moved in." You should have been on that one. Where are we? That one. So there you've got a little breakdown of William and Dorothy's early years. There we go. So what was William and Dorothy's creative response to their move? James Butler writes that the first order of poetic business for Wordsworth was to confront, in poem after poem written in his first months at Grasmere, his own ambivalence as a new Lake District resident. Was he a tourist who stayed or a homecoming native son? Somehow, the poet born in Cockermouth and educated in Hawkshead had to create a fictive self who had returned through birthright and not because he happened to see an empty house while on tour to a home in Grasmere. Poems such as Home at Grasmere and naming poems such as It Was an April Morning, Fresh and Clear, express Wordsworth's sense of belonging to the Lake District. We also see the emergence of emblems such as the Rock of Names, now displayed at the orchard at Dove Cottage, in which Wordsworth and Coleridge inscribed the initials of their family and friends. Wordsworth recognised that the initials, carved into stone, would remain when he had departed the earth, leaving the poet physically connected to place. Dorothy's creative response to the move was to record in her journal. The Grasmere journals, written between 1800 and 1803, paid close attention to villages, seasonal rhythms, weather patterns and local dialect, telling of Dorothy's companionship with nature, but also of her and her brother's place as Grasmere residents. By embedding themselves in the local community, William and Dorothy's lives were entwined with the shepherds, peddlers and beggars they met on their walks, giving William's poetry and Dorothy's work a social authenticity. There we go. These observations in Dorothy's journal often made their way into Wordsworth's poetry. For example, the leech gatherer described in Wordsworth's poem Resolution and Independence was recorded by Dorothy in a journal on the 3rd of October 1800 after meeting a man on the road. So here we have Dorothy's journal entry, and then an extract from Resolution Independence. William wrote of Dorothy in his poem The Sparrow's Nest, "She gave me eyes, she gave me ears." Wordsworth here is acknowledging Dorothy's impact on his perception of the world. She helped him to see nature more vividly, to hear its quiet music more clearly. Through her journals, observations, and her own unique sensibility, Dorothy sharpened Wordsworth's attentiveness to detail. This is what Lucy Newlyn describes as a creative partnership. Newlyn suggests that William and Dorothy made an incalculable contribution to each other's writing. What is of most interest in the Wordsworth literary partnership is their shared associative practices, their joint attachment to places, and their interdependent processes. Creativity in their household was a form of symbiosis, fostered by mutual affection and responsiveness to environment. So we move on now to the Fenwick Notes. So in the final years of his life, Wordsworth dictated a set of autobiographical commentaries on his poem to his friend Isabella Fenwick. These have been known as the Fenwick Notes. The Fenwick Notes were first published in full by Jared Curtis in 2008, although Wordsworth himself included some of the notes in the poetry collections of his later years. There was some notes included in his autobiography by Christopher Wordsworth. The Fenwick Notes offer insight into how Wordsworth understood the origin of his poems, especially the intimate link between personal experience, remembered landscapes, and poetic composition. Tours with his daughter, Dora, to Alfoxden and the Wye during his later life renewed a sense of immediacy of the past, inspiring him to write his notes and dictate them to his friend, Isabella Fenwick. In writing the notes, Wordsworth played an active role in shaping his literary legacy. Although another contributing factor in writing the notes was Wordsworth's opposition to Thomas de Quincey's articles for Tate's magazine, in which de Quincey revealed private information on Wordsworth's and their circle. Wordsworth therefore considered the notes to be a way of shaping his remembrance and literary legacy after his death. The Fenwick Notes are a crucial autobiographical piece in Wordsworth's timeline and help construct the Wordsworth way. For example, Wordsworth attributes Siborough Crag to be the rocky steep that leaves him overwhelmed and terrified in the boat stealing scene in Book 1 of the Prelude. This kind of intimate information on place was instrumental in the construction of the guide, allowing me to locate seminal spots in Wordsworth's life along the way. I'm going to move on now to talk a little bit about early literary tourism in the lakes, so we can understand a little bit about how Wordsworth's own response. We can understand a little bit about Wordsworth's own response to the region. I've only selected a few because we could stand here all day and talk about the various guides that have been written on the Lake District. Oh, there we go. Early literary portrayals played a crucial role in shaping the cultural and aesthetic perception of the Lake District well before Wordsworth penned his influential guide. The Lake District National Park Authority's 2017 nomination document to UNESCO defines the Lake District as a cultural landscape and Ullswater as of major importance as a source of aesthetic inspiration from the very earliest period. Before Wordsworth wrote his guide, a legacy of literary representation laid the groundwork for the region's aesthetic prestige, providing framework for Wordsworth's later interpretation. So first of all, we've got Thomas Gray's Journal of a Visit to the Lake District. Gray was an early literary visitor who travelled to Ullswater via Penrith in 1769, writing a journal for his friend Thomas Wharton. Although best known for his poetry, Gray's travel journal documents his journey to the lakes with charismatic detail, right down to the new black suit and spare buckles he'd hidden in his suitcase. Throughout his tour, Gray carried with him a clawed glass. It's this one here. Its primary effect being to reduce the landscape to the size of a postcard so that the perspective can be seen at a glance. This is how drawings from picturesque painters like William Gilpin form their oval shape, although the clawed glass would emit the natural feel, smell, and sounds of the landscape. Gray visits Ullswater in October. His descriptive attention to the calm, mirror-like surface of the lake, the composition of cultivated land against wild mountain, and the bold breast of Place Fell, just outside, reflects an early form of picturesque aesthetic that would later dominate 18th century portrayals of the lakes. Moreover, his phrasing when describing the landscape captures an early engagement with the sublime, a concept popularised by Edmund Burke in 1756. The rude and awful mountains show Gray's emotional response to the landscape as something both powerful and beautiful. Unlike its picturesque successors and later romantic portrayals, Gray's account is restrained and factual, more in line with a travel diary than poetic rhapsody. Gray records what he sees with occasional gentle flourishes, but largely maintains a quiet and observational tone. So if you want to read a little bit more about Gray's journal, this edition by Liverpool University Press has a really good set of notes to go along with it. And also Norman Nicholson writes a really good chapter, quite a funny chapter on Thomas Gray in his book, The Lakers. Moving on. Father Thomas West was one of the earliest writers to create a guidebook specifically for tourists visiting the Lake District. His work aimed to help visitors experience the landscape in a way that highlighted its most striking and picturesque features. West's guide highlights the best spots to stand and take in the beauty of Lakeland. These were called stations, much like the one at Clay Heights here, which has been restored and is in the hands of the National Trust, I believe. When it comes to West Segment and Ullswater, apart from a few scattered white farmhouses dotted about, the guide doesn't really portray Ullswater as a working landscape. He uses visual composition terms like promontory, reach, and amphitheatre, which makes it feel like you're looking at the landscape through an artist's lens. He almost narrates the scene as if the reader is viewing a series of carefully framed pictures. For example, he describes Skelly Nab as a bold promontory. Then he goes on to describe Galborough Park as an opening with a grand amphitheatre of shining rock, with a floor of soft green pasture once shaded by ancient oaks and dotted with thorns, trees, bushes, flocks of sheep, cattle and fallow deer. Where Gray's journal is reflective and personal, written to comfort a sickly friend, West's account is elevated, descriptive and dramatic, fulfilling its role as a guidebook for the tourist gaze. And have a drink. Very thirsty work talking, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
There we go. So William Gilpin, Observations on the Picturesque. I'm sure everyone knows this name quite well. William Gilpin's Observations on the Picturesque, published in 1792, reveals a tension between the moral and aesthetic views of the landscape. He says that in a moral light, cultivation and industry are pleasing, but the picturesque eye rejects these elements, preferring nature untamed by art. Gilpin argues that the industrious worker is morally admirable, but in a picturesque view, the tools of their trade, like the spade and the scythe, are excluded from the ideal scene. The picturesque landscape, he says, demands figures and scenes free from the marks of industry or labour. This perspective reflects a wider tension between ethics and aesthetics in how landscapes were appreciated at the time, particularly with the emergence of the Industrial Revolution in the mid-1700s and the impact of Edmund Burke's theory on the sublime. Gilpin praises Ullswater as a wonderfully sublime and correctly picturesque scene, noting how light and weather enhanced its beauty. His language shows a shift from simple observation to a deeper emotional and imaginative engagement with nature. As Norman Nicholson writes, it is in his love of certain effects of light, particularly of mist, vapours, shadows and twilight, that Gilpin approaches closest to one aspect of romanticism. He was the forerunner of those who look to art to escape from the world of physical necessity into a blurred, hazy, intangible world of imagination. He was, in fact, one to whom distance leads enchantment in the view, because distance moves out of fact into fancy. So now we move on to a very important and often overlooked piece of travel literature, which is Anne Radcliffe's Observations, published in 1795. Radcliffe, known as the Great Enchantress, toured the Lake District in 1795 after gaining fame with her Gothic novels A Sicilian Romance, The Romance of the Forest, and The Mysteries of Udolpho. Despite her success, Radcliffe's observations is often overlooked in the discussions of Lake District literature. Penny Bradshaw argues that the text captures a crucial moment in the evolution of literary ideas about the lakes just before Wordsworth's transformative poetics took hold. Bradshaw says that this text would contribute to the evolution of ideas about the lake's landscape during the period in which that region was opening up as a site of aesthetic and cultural significance, and when the Wordsworthian response to the lakes had yet to be developed. Despite the importance of the text within romantic contexts, observations have subsequently been marginalised in a textual history of the lakes, which tends to move all too simplistically from the early picturesque travel guides into Wordsworth's transformatory contribution of an anti-picturesque poetics of place from 1799 onwards, following his taking up residence in Grasmere. That was a mouthful. Radcliffe on Patterdale. Radcliffe's account of Patterdale reflects a romantic ideal of harmony between people and place, portraying local communities with warmth and respect. Radcliffe says that the village, Patterdale, is very humble as to the conditions and the views of their inhabitants, and very respectable as to their integrity and simplicity, and to their contentment, which is provided by the infrequency of emigrations to other districts. Radcliffe also emphasises her knowledge of the land. She says that not only every fell in this wild region has a name, but almost every crag of every fell, so that shepherds sitting at the fireside can direct each other to the exact spot among the mountains where a stray sheep has been seen. This attention to naming directly contrasts with Thomas Gray's 1769 view of Ullswater, as he ascends Beacon Hill and sees the lake of Ullswater surrounded by the craggy tops of 100 nameless hills. Radcliffe's focus on local naming prefigures a key romantic concern with naming, as naming and knowing landscapes fosters a sense of belonging. David Cooper writes that the evocation of a named geographical location is often predicated upon an inflected form of human attachment to a particular place. The poetic naming of place, then, opens up imaginative space for mediating on the interpretations of geography, selfhood, and collective identity. Radcliffe's observations align with and anticipate pastoral narratives like Wordsworth's Michael by idealising rural life as morally grounded and harmonious with nature. Radcliffe portrays stable, place-bound communities marked by contentment. She emphasises the intimate local knowledge of the land, and in doing so moves away from picturesque detachment to a more embedded experiential relationship with place. So this leads us nicely into Wordsworth's Guide to the Lakes. Wordsworth's Guide was published in multiple editions, but it was first written as an accompaniment to Joseph Wilkinson's Select Views in 1810. Wordsworth wrote in the guide that he intended the guide to be more than a travel manual. It was written as a guide or companion for the minds of persons or taste. Wordsworth encouraged the visitors to move through the Lake District on foot, promoting a slow, reflective engagement with the landscape that deepens aesthetic and emotional appreciation. He writes of Patterdale that no persons but such as come to Patterdale merely to pass through it should fail to walk as far as Blowick, the only enclosed land which on this side borders the higher part of the lake. The axe has here indiscriminately levelled a rich wood of birches and oaks that divided this favoured spot into 100 pitches. The guide explores pastoral landscapes, celebrating shepherding and rural tradition, yet it expresses aversion to the encroaching forces of industrialisation, positioning the lakes as a sanctuary from modernity. Wordsworth's Guide also continues to employ techniques used by previous guide writers, such as quoting poetry within the text. However, it was because of Wordsworth's poetry and his strong personal connection to the area that other writers began to do this more deliberately. As Saiko Yoshikawa explains, quoting poetic descriptions or adverting to literary associations were not the invention of Wordsworth's Guide. It was his poems and personal response, personal presence in the Lake District that encouraged other guidebook writers to seek for literary associations, transforming what had been picturesque scenes into Wordsworthian landscapes. I think that's a lovely quote from Wordsworth's Guide, an eye to perceive and a heart to enjoy. Though often positioned against the picturesque tradition, Wordsworth learned a good deal from the picturesque, especially from Gray and Gilpin, both of whom he had read carefully. He learned, for instance, to analyse a landscape and, by doing so, to store it in his mind. He learned to notice the varying effects of light on the contours of a valley and to balance a scene as a composer balances movement against movement in a sonata. That's a Nicholson quote. The guide functions as both a literary and ethical document. Jonathan Bate argues that the function of the guide is to educate, to care for the delicate ecosystem, as we now would call it, of the lakes. Wordsworth's Guide helped establish the Lake District as not just a scenic destination, but a place of deep social, historical and ecological value, celebrating the region's beauty as well as its traditional cultures. Yeah. Now we move on to contemporary guides. In recent decades, we've seen a growing trend in guidebooks that are not just practical tools for navigation, but cultural texts in their own right. Increasingly, these guides are walking focused, often encouraging visitors to explore rural or mountainous terrain. This shift reflects both a broader societal interest in slow travel and a deeper engagement with literature and place through physical experience. One notable development is the emergence of literary walking guides, which combine elements of biography, literary criticism, and travel writing. These guides encourage tourists to take what might be called literary pilgrimages, visiting key sites associated with writers such as Wordsworth's grave at St Oswald's, Emily Bronte's Top Withens, or Robert Burns' birthplace. This mode of travel represents a new form of travel literature, one that is experienced through movement. Walking, therefore, becomes a form of reading, a way of interpreting landscape through a literary lens, while literature, in turn, offers a guide to physical and emotional engagement with place. A prime example would be Greville Lindop's Literary Guide to the Lake District. Lindop's work is more than just a reference book, it's an invitation to enter the lakes through the minds of poets like Wordsworth, Coleridge, De Quincey and Southey. Recently, we've seen a digital evolution in this genre. Literary walking apps are bringing texts and places together in more interactive ways. The Dorothy Wordsworth Walks app, for instance, overlays her journal entries and you get a notification on your phone every time you are linked to a place with Dorothy's writing, while the Norman Nicholson Heritage Trail app here guides users through the poet's hometown of Milham, pairing location with poetry and biography in multimedia form. And that brings us to the Wordsworth Way, our very own guide. So the idea for creating a Wordsworth Way emerged at a meeting of the Friends of the Ullswater Way trustees in October 2023, after the trustees were inspired by a book dedicated to Wordsworth's walks. Can you remember what the book was exactly? No. There's so many.
I remember it was, you gave it to me and it was blue.
Blue.
And it said Wordsworth Walks on it, but I can't remember the name of the author. My assumption was you know.
It was a long time ago.
It's a long time.
What's happened since then?
Well, there we go. Trustees were inspired by a book about Wordsworth
By someone else's book.
in October 2023. 3 weeks later, the Friends of the Ullswater Way invited some key stakeholders, notably the Lake District Authority, the Wordsworth Trust and the University of Cumbria, to seek their views on creating a Wordsworth Way. The idea was unanimously agreed and the Wordsworth Way was born. The Friends of the Ullswater Way promotes education awareness of the heritage of the Ullswater Valley. Another key charitable objective of the Friends of the Ullswater Way is to improve the conditions of life through a series of incentives to walk or explore. Previous developments on this latter objective are the Eamont Way and the Ullswater Heritage Trail. Notable installations on the Heritage Trail include stanza stones inscribed with poetry by Kathleen Raine, the Herdwick Stones and the Dorothy Gate at Glencoyne Bay. These emblems are fixed reminders of the cultural heritage of Ullswater. So Dorothy Gate. This is where I come into the story. In September 2023, I moved to Cumbria to study a Masters in Literature, Romanticism and the English Lake District. At the time, one of my remaining projects was for a module on literary tourism and cultural heritage in the Lake District. My brief was to collaborate with a regional cultural heritage organisation and develop a project aligned with their aims. Penny, who's a course tutor, suggested I might be interested in the Wordsworth Way, particularly as I'd just completed an essay on early tourism in Ullswater. So I jumped at the opportunity to be part of a real world project. I, did the project for my module. It got good feedback, and then just continued it, and that's why we're here. Mapping the Wordsworth Way. So once the initial route was agreed from Glenriddin to Ambleside, I went away to walk it myself. I took my time and I voice noted everything that I saw and really tried to immerse myself in the landscape. Then when I returned, I began researching the places I'd visited, both historically and in relation to Wordsworth's life. Although we first envisioned one continuous Wordsworth Way, we later decided to break it into 4 separate walks. This made it more manageable for walkers and also allowed us to give each walk a distinct theme. It's difficult to trace Wordsworth's footsteps in the lakes in a purely linear or chronological narrative, so instead we titled each walk based on ideas that were central to his values, such as natural education, community and family, rather than a strict chronology. And the maps in the book were designed by Mark Richards, who did a brilliant job of capturing the route with clarity and care. And they really enhance the experience of the guide. These are some pictures from the walk. Up there we've got the Brothers Parting Stone. It's me with my dog. And there he is enjoying Grisdale Tarn. It was a lovely day. It was the first day of sunshine we'd had in about 6 months, I think. So these are the 4 walks divided. So has everyone got a copy of the guide? I'm assuming everyone's read it.
I'm not allowed to leave the room without one.
So walk 1 begins at Glenriddin Visitor Centre, just there, and follows the scenic route through Grisdale Valley to Grasmere via the Brothers Parting Stone and Grisdale Tarn, reflecting on Wordsworth's childhood adventures and enjoying poetry and stories of the Wordsworth's community efforts. Walk 2 is home at Grasmere, which explores Wordsworth's Grasmere homes, including Dove Cottage and Allen Bank, alongside his final resting place at St Oswald's Church. Walk 2 discovers how William and Dorothy expressed their love for the village in poetry and journals, visiting local waterfalls and inspiring landscapes. Walk 3 is titled Family Connections, which follows the coffin path from Grasmere to Rydal, taking in Wordsworth's final home at Rydal Mount, and several locations featured in his poetry linked to his family. Walk 3 visits Dora's Field, gifted to his daughter, and has lakeside and woodland views familiar to the Wordsworth family. Walk 4, final walk, is later life, friends and acquaintances. This walk starts at St Mary's Church in Rydal and explores the homes of Wordsworth's friends and acquaintances, including Thomas de Quincey and Dr. Thomas Arnold. This route ends at the University of Cumbria's Ambleside campus, highlighting Victorian literary connections and the importance of education. So this is the brilliant Wordsworth Way logo, designed by Gilly Allen. We had several meetings on a logo, believe it or not. Everything was chosen meticulously, the colours, the pen, the feather, the way that it says WW through the river. And then in the footsteps of great poets, we had a couple of
long discussions on
long
what
discussions.
verse we should use.
It should be poet or poet.
It's very democratic at the end. We all voted.
The guide celebrates more than just William Wordsworth. There's the poem by John Wilson in there. There's writings from, others in his literary circle. There's a lot of Dorothy Wordsworth in there as well. We decided in the footstep of great poets was better. So selecting the texts. I should also mention, the guide was designed by Dave Felton, inspired by Lakeland, and he's done a terrific job on it. And I don't think I could do a talk on creating the Wordsworth way without mentioning Dave. And he did a really, really good job. The last week of, submitting the final document to print, Dave just worked tirelessly for the whole week. So yeah, did a good job. So I can't not mention Dave. Selecting the texts. As I developed the Wordsworth way, I thought carefully about how to pair each location with text that would enhance the walker's experience, not just intellectually, but emotionally too. I wanted the selections to reflect more than just key events in Wordsworth's life. Instead, I looked for writings that explored ideas that were important to him, such as nature as a source of education, community, belonging, friendship, grief, and resilience. Where possible, I chose work with a strong connection to place. For example, at Ruthwaite Lodge, as walkers can stop and observe Helvellyn, I included fidelity and extracts from Walter Scott's Helvellyn, commemorating the tragic death of Charles Gough from Striding Edge. At Tongill, I included extracts from a narrative concerning George and Sarah Green, a tragic local story of community and loss. For me, this text reflects the Wordsworth's rooting within the Grasmere community, informing us of the importance of William and Dorothy's moral imagination. I also included voices beyond Wordsworth's own, such as his sister Dorothy, poet John Wilson, and Victorian socialite Harriet Martineau. Including literary figures other than Wordsworth shows the wide-reaching influence of his ideas, and also foregrounds the diversity of perspectives in Romantic era Lakeland. So the first and last stops on the Wordsworth way. I'm not going to go through every single stop. You'll have to buy the book for that. But to give you a sense of how it works, I'll briefly share the first and last stops. So the first stop is near Glenriddin Pier, where walkers are invited to pause and reflect on a powerful childhood moment in the prelude. In this poem, young Wordsworth rows across Ullswater under a full moon and becomes overwhelmed by the sublime presence of Stybarrow Crag. He returns the boat with trembling hands and walks home with grave and serious thoughts. It's a moment of humility, wonder, and awakening, setting the tone for the walk. At the other end of the route, the final stop is Scale Howe, formerly Greenbank, part of the University of Cumbria's Ambleside campus. Wordsworth visited this site regularly in the 1840s when it was a private residence. Later, it became home to Charlotte Mason's House of Education, a place that promoted natural education and experiential learning, ideas that echo Wordsworth's own thinking in the prelude. The final stop invites reflection, not just on Wordsworth's legacy, but on how education, landscape, and literature continue to shape each other in the lakes today. This is a little behind the scenes. So this was one of my visits to the Jerwood Centre at the Wordsworth Grasmere Museum, which is an amazing place with a vast amount of artworks and manuscripts relating to Wordsworth and other romantic literary figures. These texts here, left and right, are the narrative concerning George and Sarah Green, and the poem overlaid is Who Weeps the Strangers, which Wordsworth wrote to go along with the narrative concerning George and Sarah Green. It was a nice day. It's a little advert for the MA. So they're now offering full-time and part-time places, which is good. It's a unique opportunity to study a rich body of literary and non-literary texts within the geographical landscape which inspired them. They're having an open day on the 14th of June, and they're now taking part-time applicants. I've already said that. Some online links to buy the Wordsworth Way. These are for people on Zoom. There you go. And thank you. Any donations received will be divided between the Friends of the Ullswater Way and the friends and family of Sandgate School, which is where I work, who dedicate their time to raising funds for children and young people aged 13 to 19 years old. Well, thank you.
Let's turn on the lights.
Have I bored everyone enough now?
Well, Jade has been an absolute dream person to work with. When you're trying to get a book together, it relies on a number of synergies working well between personalities, egos, institutional responsibilities, and all that. And when we first had the idea to produce the Wordsworth Way, we didn't know whether it was going to work. It's always when you're starting fresh, you haven't a clue at the end of the day whether it's all going to come together. And there are certain numbers of key players in that process, but by far the most important is the author, the person who can express in beautiful words something which those people who don't have that talent just sort of stand around in awe. And I remember the first time she produced a draft on this, I couldn't believe the quality of the text. There's one person I'm very tempted, well, one of my favourite authors today is Robert McFarlane, who's produced a new book, and he's a wordsmith of top quality, I think. And she's working, I think, in the same area. I wouldn't say she's made it yet, but I think the quality, the ability to transcribe the landscape and the individuals behind it is something very, very special. And it's the first piece of real work you've done, I think. And I'm absolutely convinced there'll be more to come. I don't know whether we in Friends of the Ullswater Way intend to go down the route of multiplying the number of ways. As you've heard, we started with the Ullswater Way, and then there was the Emont Way, and then the Wordsworth Way, like the spokes on a wheel. We're running out of routes. I think this encapsulates perfectly our vision as an institution that tries to promote the reflection on the history and the culture and the place. And I think she's covered that very well in her presentation today. So congratulations. Are there any questions, either from the floor or from the Zoomers? Thank you. Yes.
Specific one.
Oh, come on.
Something I didn't know about. I know that you have a lot of artists use a camera obscura for painting. But what was the name of the little
The Claude glass.
cord
Claude.
glass?
Let me go back to it for you.
So the question was, how does a Claude glass work for the Zoomers? I was going to ask the same.
So you look at the landscape through the glass, and it gives you a certain visual. Where are we? This one.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's named after Claude Lorraine, painter. And you look through the glass, and it gives you an oval shape, and it gives you a certain tint, a certain colour. So that's why you get a lot of sort of carroty colours in paintings from that time.
Did it have any special optical characteristics? You know, was it magnified? Or...
I'm not sure. I
I
don't.
think you looked at it over your shoulder.
Yeah, that's it.
It's like looking at your phone screen, not turned on, but yeah, so you have to look at the view.
It's a reflection.
Yeah.
You can go back to the view, I think, and you look through the glass, and
See, it was a solid back.
I think you could put different colours in it, because if they turn to the Clay viewing station slide, you can see the next slide, I think it is, Jade, you can see that the National Trust have put different colours into the viewing station to reflect the fact that, I don't know, if you went and stood in front of or you were looking for the purple glass, you were thinking storms And if you were looking at the green glass, you were thinking spring and so on.
I see.
Ah,
To get
Mm.
it's sort of feelings going.
fascinating.
Yeah, it's a really lovely space to go.
Sorry?
Are there other questions, either about the guide or the author or the future on World Environment Day?
Is it all, have the national park already managed to waymark it all?
Not all of it. If you go to the visitor centre, you'll find one there. There's one at the university, and there's a couple on the way, but I don't think we've not got all of them out, have we?
There's more available to go out.
We are going to put some more out.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
It's quite a complicated issue, I think, for the Park Authority. For very good reasons. They want to reduce the amount of little stuff,
Yeah.
you know, signage and so on on the fells, and I can completely buy that. On the other hand, we like to make a noise about this particular way, and I think the logo designed by Gilly is just spectacular.
Mm.
There was a sort of competition going on. She had various options to present to us, and we had different decisions at different times of the day.
Yeah.
But this, in the end of the day, the beautiful match between the two W's representing both Wordsworths and the daffodils and the mountains and the quill pen and so on. We just thought it was sublime. So we'd like to make more publicity for the way and stick these up. Of course, we have to be careful and respect everything. But yeah, so we intend to increase the amount of signage we can just to uplift people as they're walking along.
She did a really good job on the poster as well, didn't she?
Yes, maybe I don't know whether we have a poster here. I don't know whether you managed to bring one, Gordon. She produced a beautiful poster,
Oh, there it
which
is.
you
We can't really see. You can't really see it too well.
see it very well.
Again, this was lots and lots of backs and forth of emails between what words we should have on it and how
Yeah.
it should look. And again, she was brilliant in incorporating everything that everybody wanted. And that's the thing about the Wordsworth Way. There were so many people involved in it, so many people invested in it, that it was sort of balancing what everybody wants and the products. I think it looks great. But yeah, Gilly did a great job on that. This little image of Dorothy here, we struggled really because there aren't many images of Dorothy Wordsworth in her well, at all really. You know, the famous one is the crossway image of Dorothy when she's, you know, in a later life. This image here was drawn by a local Cumbrian artist for the Dorothy Wordsworth Walks app, and she kindly gave us permission to use it, and I think it's a really nice little.
She did give us permission.
Pardon?
She did give us permission.
Yeah.
It wasn't signed of, it was.
Oh, she did. She did give us.
Careful about that.
She definitely did. Yeah.
No.
What did, you mentioned that De Quincey kind of revealed some private, what kind of things did he reveal about him? He wrote about his friendship or the family? Or...
I think it was a lot about the relationships and sort of who was, you know, who they were talking to. And Wordsworth was a very sort of private person, so he didn't like that.
Did he do that out of malice? Did he just do it thinking it'd be okay and William wasn't happy with it?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
I believe he did it to he was writing an article for money basically.
Yeah. The Tate's magazine.
One of the interesting things I discovered when I was doing a little bit of research before launching this process is that there are no rules about who can have a footpath named after them. So if you want to, if you know, there's a local footpath which you happen to like and you want to name it after your son or daughter or dog or whatever, you can do that. As I said, there are no rules. And so the first stage, what we tried to do was to get stakeholders together, all who have their own interests of one sort or another, to see who would be opposed to the idea of having a way named after Wordsworth. And there was a good precedent because Coleridge had a way created, presumably also by a local community, wanted to make a noise about their local culture. And we didn't know at this stage when we launched this whether this would go down like a lead balloon or whether it was something which people were willing to accept. But so there's no authority, no institution who has to approve it. It's quite one of the extraordinary things. In my naivety, I thought somewhere in the UK bureaucracy there'd be someone who has to give a tick, say right. But no. So when you leave the room today, if you have a local walk that you want to name after your granny or whatever, feel free to try it. I mean, yeah. So far, we haven't had any opposition from anyone, I'm glad to say. Are there any other questions either from the Zoomers or the floor to Jade?
What's the total length of the walk if you did it in the trail?
The full, if you did all of the walk, including around, I think it's 21 miles, isn't it?
The linear walk is 14.1, something like that.
Yeah.
And then the first section is there's no round to, as it were, it's more or less linear. But the other ones, you can do these circular walks. So I did it with my wife just the other day, and they're very nice, actually.
Mm.
And for the elderly amongst us, it's good to have a more relaxing walk. But we had a lot of discussion within the preparation of the guidebook about how to present that, and we maybe still haven't got it exactly right, because there's some people who will want to do genuine fell walking, and that's only really happening on the first of the 4 walks. The others are more easier walking levels.
Yeah, we had the linear walk from here to the university, which was 14 miles. And Dave Felton just said you can't, because he's written so many guidebooks, he said you can't expect people to walk 14 miles in one go. So that's how we've ended up with these circular add-ons. But if you were to do all of those walks, including the circulars, I think it equals around 21 miles to do everything. So you could break it into two or 3 days, really.
Yeah, there's also an issue that Dave is very keen to ensure you can get to a walk and do the walk and get back by public transport, which is not easy. Between Ambleside and Glenridding, it's slightly complicated. As you know, we're trying to improve bus services and so on here locally, but it's a bit more complicated than we like. So for someone who doesn't have their own transport, it's not that easy. Any more? Yes, thank you.
Did you use all existing footpaths, or did you have to create
No, they're all existing.
the farms of these?
No, it's all permitted rights of way. Yeah.
Yeah, the extraordinary thing is when we were involved in creating the Emont Way, it took 3 years. 3 years of negotiation with farmers and so on to join up the dots. Because we didn't make any new paths, it's all a question of simply renaming. That was very easy. So we were able to get from the concept in February last year to the launch in April this year without any difficulties at all. I was hearing on the radio about the creation of the Pennine Way, which I think took 40 years. So it's quite complicated sometimes. Any more to say? Maybe yes. Gordon, would you like to say a few things?
Right. So for those of you, do I need a mic?
Hang on.
Thank you. Okay, hopefully that's coming through loud and clear on the Zoom. Right, for those of you who have suddenly got the idea of creating your own footpath and naming it for yourself and asking the question, how hard can it be? then I can assure you it is quite hard. Particularly from the Eamont way, we found that very hard. This was much, much easier, and in great part with Jade's assistance. Another one of the reasons for doing the creating the Wordsworth Way was to do with actual public transport. So we had the Ullswater Way to begin with, and then we created the Eamont Way, and one of the reasons for doing that was so that people could now arrive by public transport, the train in Penrith, and walk the Eamont Way, and then link that to the Ullswater Way, and by tea time, maybe a little bit later, or they could walk the Eamont Way and jump on a steamer, but by tea time, they're in the heart of the Lake District. And so the Wordsworth Way is a natural extension, so they can actually now walk, walk all the way from Penrith now to Ambleside. And the logical extension of that is they walk to Windermere and they go home on the train. So we're almost there, but that was just a step too far within the terms of what we were doing and what we were trying to do. In terms of walking the Wordsworth Way and the guidebook, do you need, if you walk the Wordsworth Way without the guidebook, would you enjoy it? Well, of course you would. And can you read the guidebook without walking the Wordsworth Way? Yes, you can do that as well, and you will enjoy it because it is beautifully written and crafted by Jade. But when you bring the two together and you walk it whilst you're reading the words, the book, the input from 200 years of literary genius, then it is so much more of an experience. And I was privileged to be the first one to do that because I was proofreading the text that Jade had written. And I've walked this route a few times, but walking it with the text, it transformed the whole experience. So I really do recommend for those of you that can and are able to do the walk with the guidebook in hand. One of the other reasons for doing this is to bring Dorothy Wordsworth to the fore as well, in terms of her contribution to the work of William Wordsworth. Noticeably, that the poem "The Daffodils," the major contribution is from Dorothy. She gave me eyes to see and ears to hear, is something that he wrote a long, long time ago. And I think it's a great pity for the world, but Dorothy in particular, that the only image we have of Dorothy that is known to be her is the one when she was a relatively elderly woman and in ill health at that. If there'd been an image, a picture, a painting showing Dorothy as the young, vibrant, energetic woman that she was, then I think her story would be very, very different. But together, it would be, Dorothy really does deserve the recognition, and she gets a lot of that in this particular booklet. Overall, I think we've seen in creating this, the guidebook, you all now know just how much depth of knowledge and depth of research has gone into this, into creating this. We have, Jade has really, really stepped up and has drawn on all of her knowledge, and it didn't stop there. I know Jade did an awful lot of research in addition to what she already knew, and has put that into the guidebook here. So it's not just about the poets, it's about some of the former travel writers as well, and there's so much condensed knowledge that she's inputted into the guidebook. It really is very, very special. So I'd encourage you to get a copy. Even if you feel you're not up to the walk, that it's a wonderful read, just in the short format. I know it's 60 pages, but there's so much work gone into that to achieve these 60 pages. It is broken down into the 4 sections, And that was, I suppose, another reason. So we get, what, 15 million visitors to the Lake District, maybe 18, not quite sure, half of whom go through from Ambleside to Grasmere. But other than on hotels and such like Wordsworth, the name Wordsworth, the fact that it is the birthplace, it's not the birthplace, the cradle of the Romantic literary movement, is completely lost to most of those people going through. So in creating the path, the walk, then hopefully it brings attention to that and will draw people to the words of Wordsworth and the other lake poets, because the words today, in today's environment, today's climate, the need to improve how we think about our environment, how we treat our environment, is as important now, if not more important, than when it was then. So all of these reasons is going into the Wordsworth Way. But enough of me. I think, yeah, just like to thank Jade very, very much. She's created a wonderful guide. The local community here at Patterdale, also Grasmere and Ambleside, the Lakes Parish, they gave us a big thank you to them for giving the whole project its blessing. To Mark Richards, of course, for doing the wonderful maps in his own style, and also Dave Felton, who managed to bring all of this to a cohesive whole. So a big, big thank you to all of them, and especially to Jade. And for tonight, a big, big thank you to Jade for coming and presenting to you all. So Jade, thank you very much indeed.
I have one more thing to say. No, two things. Our next talk will take place on the 3rd of July. It's going to take place in Watermillock Village Hall. And we are going to have the privilege, honour, to have the current CEO of the Lake District Park Authorities to talk to us, Gavin Capstick. He's been in the job for half a year or so, and it's a good opportunity to interrogate him on what his priorities are, how his institution can react to all the pressures that they have to live with. So he's going to come to us on the 3rd of July. I hope we get a good turnout, both in Watermillock Village Hall and also online. The second thing, just quickly to say, is one of the things that I got to mention was that according to the statistics, Wordsworth walked 175,000 miles in his life. 175,000 miles is equivalent to walking 7 times around the globe. It's equivalent to walking 40 miles every day, every week of your life. And I think to produce a book to honour that prowess, I don't know how many other people in the world have ever got anything approaching that that record. But I think to honour the contribution that Wordsworth made to walking is something very, very special. And a reminder to all of us who come here in cars and travel around, looking at on the World Environment Day, to look at alternative ways of travelling which are friendly to the environment. I think that's a very nice final thought to leave with you. So thank you again, Jade, and wish you the best return home. Please donate generously online or here as a donation to this talk. And also, I don't think anyone should be allowed to leave the room. Maybe Gordon, you can control the door without a Wordsworth Way guide in their hand. There are £7.50, and what's more, they will be signed.
Well,